Thank you very much. It's really nice to come to the meeting. I've been a couple of times before, and it's nice to see the trainee session having such a prominence. So these are really just thoughts and just designed to make you think about what you want and to tell you a bit about my experience in applying for a consultant post. So if we just go on to the next slide. And then if you just click through, yeah. So I'm just going to talk about what to think about while you're training, a bit about what you would do prior to a consultant interview, a few thoughts about the actual interview, and then a bit about settling into a post and day-to-day management. So can I just ask, of the people who are here who are registrars, how many of you are in your last couple of years of training? Okay, quite a few. And how many of you think you know where you want to work? And how many of you will want to work in the region that you're training in? Okay, so that's most people. Okay, that's fine. So next slide, please. So I think it was mentioned earlier on as well about thinking about things early in terms of research projects, and I think you really can't emphasise that enough. And I think you have to be thinking from very early in a registrar career about what kind of job you would like. And there will be experiential sort of influence with that. So, you know, it's very common for somebody to work with someone that they find really inspirational, and then they decide they want to be like them, or they work in a particular type of centre and want to use that kind of model. But I think really, you know, even from ST3, you need to be thinking about what you want in the long run, because really your registrar years are only a very small portion of your overall career. You're going to be a consultant for 20 or 25 years, so it's important that you get that experience somewhere that you're happy with. Next one, please. So I think in terms of thinking about what's important to you, for some people, being a subspecialist might be very important, and I wanted to do hemostasis and thrombosis, so that then limited me in terms of the kind of jobs that I would apply for. You might want a job that's got a particular academic commitment, so you might want a 50-50 job, or you might want a primarily academically funded job with an honorary NHS component. And I think, you know, again, that will influence how often opportunities come up and where you can apply. So my post is a full-time NHS post, but I'm involved in day-to-day clinical research, both in the hospital and around our region. And I think there were lots of factors involved in that decision. I was worried about the repetitive funding applications with a full-time academic post, but I think you just have to think about what suits you best. Geographical location, I think that becomes more important as, you know, you get older, you maybe have a family, your spouse has got commitments nearby. So I think home versus away, there's a lot of pros and cons of that. So I became a consultant in the unit that I trained in. It was really good in that I know everyone, so if I need to get things done, I normally know someone in the right department. You know, I know the layout of the hospital, I know the systems. But I have been a first-year registrar with lots of the people that I work with as well, and that comes with its own problems. I think if you go away, there are lifestyle issues in terms of settling into a new region, but you do come with a fresh pair of eyes and a fresh start. So I think, you know, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's important to be aware of what is good and bad about those situations. Your colleagues, I think that is probably the most important thing. Somebody said that to me when I was applying, that, you know, you're going to work with them for a long time, so you need to know you're going to get on. On one of the future slides, it says you spend more time with your colleagues than you do with your spouse some weeks, which is true. So, yeah, you need to know who you're going to be working with and that you're happy that you can work with them. And then the type of trust. So, again, this is a preference thing. Some people really want to work in a huge hospital with loads of, you know, cool specialties and complex surgery, and some people would much rather be in a smaller environment where they know everyone on a more individual basis. So again, it's just something to think about. Next slide, please. And then if you just keep clicking through. So I think in terms of the things you can do, I think people get a bit fixated during training about assessments, and it's partly because of the way the e-portfolio system is set up in terms of doing audits and doing assessments and things. But really, the people who are going to be your future colleagues just want to know that you're going to deliver good clinical care as the first thing. So when they're looking at you and thinking about if they want to work with you in the long run, that's the first thing they're going to think about. Is this someone who can deliver sort of sound clinical care and make good decisions, and who could look after a mutually sort of owned set of patients. I think everybody does projects, and I think you need to do them, but I think more importantly, you need to implement actions from them. So I feel it's better to do a smaller number and to see positive outcomes from the things that you've done rather than to do lots of small projects. I appreciate that's not always that easy. And you can also think of service development suggestions, which can be very, very simple, but improving sort of processes and patient flow and things like that makes a big difference. If you decide you want to do clotting, so how many people here want to do hemostasis and thrombosis as their long-term career? Okay, so once you've decided, there's loads of stuff you can do. There's lots of national committees. A lot of national committees will look for a trainee representative, like the ITP Forum has a trainee representative on it. There's HemeStar has just been discussed, which is a great initiative. There's lots of opportunity for trainee engagement. So if you can get involved in one of those committees, it's a very good idea. And I wouldn't be frightened to declare your interest once you've decided on it. But it is a bit like a snowball effect. Once you say you want to do it, and then you attract more and more attention from that area. And it can spiral out of control by the end, I think. And then I think you should talk to new consultants in the trusts that you're interested in, basically to find out about their experiences, because that's the most helpful thing, is talking to someone who's been through the process recently. Next one, please. And then just a few things about coming up to interview. So I think knowing what's going on in the department and any topical issues is really helpful, even if they're controversial, just to know that they exist and to have an opinion about what you might do for them. Talking to your colleagues about workload plans and any service development. So my post, we changed our on-call system quite significantly not long after I'd been appointed to a sort of weekly attending system shared amongst 4 of us. So we had quite a lot of discussion about how that would work and how we would share things out before I came into post, and that was really helpful to think about how we redistribute the work. Is it a new post or a replacement post? So a replacement post, you would normally inherit patients from your predecessor. A new post may sort of have things rejigged from the current workload. And what's the job plan? So just a quick show of hands, are you aware of the existence of job plans? Yeah, okay. So the post should be advertised with a job plan that will give you an outline of the work. And then that is up for review regularly whilst you're in post. So that will allocate a certain number of sessions to particular activities. And you would have the opportunity to contribute to that and to ask about things to be included in it. Know when it's likely to be advertised. There's often a fairly short interval actually between advertising and submission deadline, and then again between submission deadline and interview. So it's quite helpful to know those dates. Obviously don't be late, that's standard advice, isn't it? And then make sure the application is personalised to the post. So I've never, apart from my own, I've not seen any of the submitted consultants' applications, but I review applications for junior specialty doctors in our trust. And it's really frequent that they submit an application that's clearly supposed to be for somewhere else, or has incorrect information about the post, and it just looks really awful. So I think you want to put something in it about why you want that particular post and showing that you have read the job plan and you know the trust. Next one, please. And then you have these meetings before the interview, which I found really weird. So there's various people who you can meet, and most of these people you probably won't have met before, certainly not the managerial people. And it's actually really interesting, but a bit artificial. So it depends on the size of your trust. Where I work, the chief exec doesn't meet consultant interview candidates prior to interview. I emailed and asked, and you just get a very polite reply saying thanks but no thanks kind of thing. But I think smaller trusts, the chief exec often will meet people, and that is a helpful thing to do. And obviously that's going to be a very strategic type of discussion. The chief medical officer or medical director, I guess, is probably a better description. is helpful, and then the Chief Operating Officer. So I met our COO, and she talked to me a bit about how clinics work and patient pathways, waiting times, that kind of thing. And then the people at the bottom you will know, because you'll be working with them if you're already in the trust, or you would have had some contact with them before. So divisional directors and managers, the service lead for the department, and then I think specialist nursing teams is really helpful actually, because they're normally the people who know what's going on the ground. They've often got ideas about what could be changed and what could be improved that they themselves haven't been able to implement. So I think showing that you've talked to the people who are actually looking after the patients day to day looks very good, and it gives you an idea about what kind of things could be done. And then if you can get any feedback from patients and carers, so departments will do satisfaction surveys or surveys in terms of whether, I can't remember, there's a specific phrase for it. There's a national survey that basically says, would you recommend us as a venue of care? And if you can get some information about what that's shown, then I think that's helpful as well. Next one, please. Find out who'll be on the panel and who they are and what they're interested in. Obviously know where you're going and what time you need to be there. When I saw our medical director before the interview, he said, I'll definitely ask you about something that's in the news in terms of healthcare at your interview. So I was sort of frantically reading the BBC website and various papers and things. And what he actually asked me about was, at the time there'd been a plan for GP services to be managed by secondary care. So it had been in the press for a little while. And he asked me what I thought of that. And actually, what he said to me before was, I'm not bothered what you say as long as you have a sensible opinion that you can back up. So there was a lot of preparation, and then the thing that he asked me about, I actually hadn't heard anything about at all. But I managed to have an opinion, so that was okay. And then I think you do need to ask about more practical issues as well. And this is difficult because obviously you don't want to get very pernickety ahead of being accepted for a job, but I think it's reasonable to ask if there's an office allocated for the post holder. Secretarial support is a really big issue because a lot of new consultant posts don't come with secretarial support funding. So again, I think it's reasonable to say, is there an allocation for parts of a parts of a whole-time secretary, or if it's a replacement post, would the previous secretary work for the new post holder? So I think things like that are very important. And if you know who your secretary is going to be, it's really important to know that you get on with that person as well. Okay, next one, please. So at the interview, so I think you definitely have to be yourself. I can remember sitting outside mine, and I knew most of the people on the panel anyway, and I thought, I can't pretend to be someone I'm not because they would all know anyhow. And then I also thought, well, if they don't want me for the post as I am, then it's probably not really going to work anyway. So I think you do just have to be yourself and be honest as well. So I got asked about what my aims would be in terms of a particular service a year after starting post, which is a very short time. So I think you have to be cautious and not sort of making promises about over-delivering with that. I think it's completely reasonable to stop and think before you answer, and you basically want to be putting answers back that show that you know the service and the patients, and that you've also thought about slightly longer term developments. Next one, please. So then moving on to settling in, I think, again, this depends really on whether you've come from a different region or whether you're where you have been in training. So you want to get to know the team you're working with, talk to your colleagues about how you'll work together, any new systems that you've got. Think about your PA allocation and how you'll comply with it. I have to say I find this very difficult because a lot of the work in my job is liaison type haematology with ITU and obstetrics and things like that, and that is very difficult to quantify. But I think you need to have a rough idea of what you're doing and approximately how much time each thing is taking up. I think deciding on things like how you want to be contacted, how you'll manage your diary and who you'll share it with is really important. So I share my diary with quite a lot of people because I would rather that our nurses and secretaries know where I am. Some people don't like doing that and they want to have it just to themselves, and it's really up to you, but I think they're things to consider. We have a shared calendar amongst the 4 consultants who work together, and a WhatsApp group. So, you know, whatever works for you. But I think ways of communicating with your immediate colleagues is very helpful. And also, I think at this point, you know, it's reasonable to talk about any new ideas you've got and how you're going to implement them, even if that is going to take some time. Next one, please. So these are just sort of initial perspectives, really. So I think clinical decisions are quite often the easiest part of a consultant post. And really, it's the other things that become difficult, partly because you don't have much previous experience with them. I think you do have an ability to change things, which is really nice, but it can be extremely frustrating. And change takes time. I think that would be my one kind of key thing, really, that things do take time to change. I think you have to think that, you know, if you're going to look after a group of patients over 20 or 25 years, you're probably going to be the person who knows them best, along with your nursing colleagues. And you need to be their voice and their representative in terms of changing processes and getting the best for them. You definitely won't ever be done, and you need to get a system that allows you to manage this. So I use a flagging system on Outlook for pending tasks, which I've sort of developed over a few years, so that I know I won't forget about things, which was my main worry about leaving things. But you know, you'll have all been in clinical practice for a long time by then, so it's just choosing something that works for you. And I think the last point's really difficult, because I think as trainees you're encouraged to always do projects, always get involved in things, really the sort of messages as much as you can. But I think you do have to sometimes say no, or maybe rather than no, you have to say not yet, or not like that. So you might say, that's a good idea, but we can't do it yet for these reasons, or that's a good idea, but could we do it in this slightly different way? And I think that is very difficult. Next one, please. It's completely fine to still ask for clinical advice, and there's loads of national forums, so you can ask your immediate colleagues, which we do all the time at work. You know, when we're sort of bumping into each other on the haemophilia unit or in other environments, we'll talk about difficult patients we've had on call, or somebody we've seen in outpatients. And then there's quite a lot of national email forums where people will ask for advice on more complicated cases. And I've used the MDT quite a lot, so our haemophilia MDT, if we've got difficult cases, I will document that we've discussed it there and use that as a way of canvassing opinion amongst colleagues. Next one, please. So just a few tips. So you'll never be done. Have a prioritisation system that works for you. Change takes time, but you have got the ability to make changes, which I think is really, really nice. I think, you know, everyone does this anyway, but you've got to try to have good working relationships. You work with your colleagues for a very long time, medical and non-medical, and you will some weeks spend more time with them than you will with your spouse and your family. So I think choosing your colleagues is really important. Next one. So use of peer support, I think, is really helpful. We had consultant induction in our trust that lasted for a few weeks, and there was a group of 6 of us from all different specialties, and we've kind of stayed in touch and occasionally go out together for a meal. And there's no other physicians, there's a sort of wide variety of specialties, but that's been very helpful for me because everyone's at a similar stage, and you can talk about sort of more operational things rather than specialty specific stuff. I think you have to be honest and realistic about when things are working or where they're not, but where they're not, you need to think about how you can change it to improve it and to use meetings and reviews constructively. And then I think because you're going to work somewhere for a long time, you do want to be involved in organisational issues and developments and changing processes. And then I think you need to try to enjoy it. It is really good fun. There's never ever a dull moment. A wide variety of things that come up, clinical and non-clinical. So I think it's very exciting times. That's everything I had to say, but I'm very happy to take any questions if there are any.